a large population of Windows users migrated to Linux. Surprisingly, many in this population appears to have migrated to Zorin specifically.
Zorin OS 18 is the new and upcoming release of the free and open source Linux operating system, designed to offer a familiar environment for users transitioning from Windows while still striking a good balance.
Where I've been a Linux guy for like 6 years, and Windows has never had the worst reputation in the public that it has had for a while now,
A mass exodus from Windows is underway, and the destination that millions of users are choosing is a Linux distribution called Zorin OS. This is not the gradual, decades-long migration that Linux advocates have predicted and hoped for through successive generations of open-source enthusiasm. This is a sudden, accelerating surge that found its momentum the moment Microsoft made a decision that converted loyal, long-term users into former customers with a speed that caught the entire industry off guard. The users making this switch are not describing it as a technical upgrade or an ideological statement. They are describing Zorin OS as simply more reliable and less exhausting than the Windows experience has become. Weighed down as it is by software nobody asked for and updates that arrive with consequences nobody was warned about. When users start choosing an alternative not because it dazzles them, but because their current platform has worn them down. That is a different and more durable kind of departure.
Zorin OS 18.1 has officially dropped as of last week, and I have to say, this release is pretty impressive. Whether you're a longtime Linux user, someone curious about ditching Windows, or you've already been running Zorin OS 18, this update has something meaningful for everyone.
Zorin OS has recorded a sharp and notable climb in adoption. Approaching 1 million downloads following its most recent release, the figure that should be commanding Microsoft's full attention is not the total download count, but the composition behind it. Approximately 70 to 80% of those downloads originated from Windows users, not from people already operating within the Linux ecosystem making a distribution switch. These are mainstream Windows users making a deliberate decision to leave a platform they have used for years and replace it with something built on an entirely different foundation. That is not the behavior of a niche community exploring technical alternatives. That is a broad, cross-demographic shift that reflects something real and sustained happening in how everyday users feel about the platform they wake up to every morning. Microsoft cannot look at that composition and conclude the problem is small or
Zorin OS says nearly 1 million downloads after its latest release. Almost 800,000 came from Windows users.
To appreciate why this moment carries the weight it does, the foundation of Windows 3DK dominance needs to be understood clearly. Because that dominance was never built on affection or enthusiasm. Windows was simply everywhere. It arrived pre-installed on virtually every PC sold through virtually every retail channel. It ran the software people needed. It supported the hardware people owned. It was predictable enough that users never had to think about it, and that invisibility was its greatest strength. Microsoft built an empire, not on loyalty, but on dependency. And dependency is a stable foundation, right up until the moment a credible alternative appears that removes the practical barriers to leaving. Zorin OS has become that alternative for a growing number of people who spent years assuming no such option existed, and the downloads are reflecting exactly what happens when that assumption is corrected.
Arrives just 6 months after the original Zorin OS 18 launch. And that original release has already been downloaded over 3.3 million times. That's not a small number for a Linux distro, folks. That tells you that people are genuinely looking for alternatives to Windows, and Zorin OS is capturing that audience in a real way.
Windows 11 was the moment. Microsoft handed its frustrated users both the motivation and the justification they needed to act on feelings that had been building for years. The hardware requirements Microsoft attached to the new operating system did not just introduce a technical threshold. They communicated to hundreds of millions of people that computers, which had been working perfectly well, were no longer considered adequate by the company that made the software running on them. TPM 2.0 requirements, processor generation restrictions, secure boot mandates. Machines that had been running Windows 10 without complaint for years were officially classified as incompatible. The processors had not degraded, the memory had not disappeared, the hardware had not failed in any way that its owners could observe or measure. Microsoft had simply redrawn the boundary and left those machines on the wrong side of it. That decision planted resentment in a portion of the user base large enough to be measured in the hundreds of millions. And Microsoft has never genuinely reckoned with what that resentment has been doing in the years since.
Zorin's claim to fame is that supposedly its Linux version looks the closest to Windows, and they can also change their look to look close to a Mac as well.
The Windows 10 end of support deadline arrived and transformed that accumulated resentment into something with sharper edges and more immediate consequences. Microsoft presented users with a set of options that were framed as choices but experienced as an ultimatum. Continue running Windows 10 without security updates, accepting the exposure that comes with an unprotected operating system. Purchase new hardware that meets Windows 11's requirements. Upgrade if existing hardware happened to qualify. Pay for extended support where that option was available. Or find another path entirely. None of these options carried the feeling of a company taking care of its users. Each of them carried the feeling of a company extracting a response from people who had already paid for software they were now being told was expiring.
In fact, Microsoft keeps pushing back the end of support date because enough of y'all are stubborn. And when people are willing to forego the crucial security and stability upgrades just to avoid your current operating system, it says a lot about the failure that Microsoft has on their hands here. They have essentially coasted on decades of market dominance and whatever goodwill they had built with their users. However, the competition is finally creeping up.
The emotional experience of that moment mattered enormously, and Microsoft appears to have underestimated it significantly. This was not an upgrade being offered to users who were ready for something new. This was a deadline being issued to users who had done nothing wrong, whose hardware was still functional, and who were now being told that continued protection required payment. New hardware, or compliance with requirements they had never agreed to. Users felt the nature of that transaction clearly. Feelings generated by that kind of interaction do not dissolve when a new feature rolls out or when a press release announces improvements. They settle into the background of every subsequent interaction a person has with the platform, shaping how each new decision by Microsoft gets received and interpreted.
Microsoft had some issues with recent updates, including bugs and stability problems, especially black screens. And Windows 10 is also reaching its end of life, so naturally more people are starting to look for alternatives.
The frustration that the Windows 11 deadline crystallized had not originated there. It had been accumulating through a long sequence of smaller impositions that individually seemed manageable, but collectively communicated something much larger. Advertisements appearing inside the Start menu and File Explorer. Mandatory Microsoft account creation woven into the installation process. Background telemetry running continuously and collecting behavioral data without explicit user consent. System settings configured by users being quietly reset following routine updates. RAM and CPU resources being consumed by background processes that users had no straightforward way to identify or disable. Each of these things arrived packaged in language about improving the user experience or enhancing system security. Each of them transferred a small amount of control from the person using the machine to the company that made the software running on it.
Zorin OS thinks differently. It is designed to run well even on older hardware.
The cumulative weight of all those small transfers is what ultimately changed how Windows felt to the people living inside it every day. Individually, any single item on that list could be rationalized or tolerated, viewed together across years of experience. They assembled into a portrait of an operating system that had quietly changed its primary allegiance. Windows had transformed from a tool that existed to serve the person sitting in front of it into a platform that existed to serve the commercial interests of the company that owned it. The computer on the desk stopped feeling like personal property and started feeling like Microsoft's real estate that users were occupying under terms Microsoft reserved the right to revise at any time. Zorin OS did not need to be extraordinary to win those users. It only needed to feel like theirs again. and for a growing number of people, it does.
Microsoft announced they were pulling Copilot out of Windows. The internet celebrated, we celebrated, I made videos about it, I was so happy, everyone was happy. And then Microsoft's response was to remove the word Copilot. Like, that's it. That's basically the whole story, except obviously it's not here with Microsoft because the audacity of this company runs deep and we need to talk about it. Welcome to the Olive Badger channel.